America has long been known as one of the world's greatest agricultural powers. For generations, its farmers helped feed millions across the globe. But today, many of those same families are facing a very different reality. Trade disputes have reshaped global markets. Export opportunities have become less predictable. Production costs continue to rise. Fertilizer, fuel, and machinery are more expensive than they were only a few years ago. Across parts of rural America, farmers are asking a difficult question. How do you protect a nation's food security when the global economy itself has become uncertain? Now, travel nearly 5,000 miles across the Atlantic. In a country that many outsiders once dismissed as poor, unstable, and dependent, another question is being asked. Not, how much gold can we export? But rather, how many families can our gold help feed? That single question may be changing the future of Burkina Faso. Instead of directing every dollar from its mineral wealth toward debt obligations or foreign priorities, Burkina Faso has begun pursuing a different vision. A vision where part of the nation's gold revenue is transformed into irrigation systems, improved seeds, agricultural equipment, storage facilities, and stronger food security. For many observers, it sounds almost impossible. Why would a country rich in gold choose farms before foreign debt? Why would a government believe that fields are more valuable than financial reports? And why are more Africans beginning to watch this strategy with growing interest? If you believe every nation deserves the opportunity to build its future with its own resources, take a moment to press like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice helps bring thoughtful conversations like this to more people around the world. The contrast becomes even more striking when viewed through the lives of two ordinary farmers. In Iowa, an American farmer walks through fields his family has cultivated for generations. Rising production costs, changing export markets, and global uncertainty have made every planting season feel like a gamble. Each decision carries more financial pressure than the last. Thousands of miles away, outside Ouagadougou, another farmer watches workers finish installing a new irrigation canal. For years, the harvest depended almost entirely on unpredictable rainfall. Now, for the first time, water reaches his fields even during the dry season. His expectations are no longer measured only by hope, but by preparation. These two men have never met. They speak different languages. They live on different continents. Yet both are trying to answer the same timeless question. How can a nation protect the people who grow its food? The answer offered by Burkina Faso is attracting attention far beyond West Africa. Supporters call it a bold investment in national resilience. Critics question whether such an ambitious strategy can succeed. Economists continue to debate the risks. But for many African families, the discussion is becoming far more personal, because they are beginning to imagine something their parents rarely believed possible. What if Africa's natural resources could first strengthen African farms before serving anyone else? That idea is larger than agriculture. It challenges decades of economic thinking. It raises new questions about sovereignty, development, and the true purpose of national wealth. And it all begins with one remarkable decision. To understand why Burkina Faso believes gold belongs in its fields instead of disappearing into an endless cycle of debt, we first need to understand what changed inside the country's vision for its future. Because once gold stopped leaving the country in the same way, everything else began to change. For decades, Burkina Faso's greatest wealth traveled in only one direction. It came out of the ground. It was loaded onto trucks. It crossed borders. It entered international markets. And for many ordinary citizens, it simply disappeared from daily life. Gold became one of Burkina Faso's most valuable exports. Yet countless villages still struggled with unreliable harvests, limited irrigation, aging farming equipment, and food insecurity. Many people quietly ask the same question. If our land is so rich, Why do our farms remain so vulnerable? That question slowly evolved into something much larger than economics. It became a question about national priorities. Under President Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso began presenting a different philosophy. Natural resources should not only generate income, they should strengthen the country's ability to stand on its own. Instead of seeing gold only as a source of foreign exchange, policymakers increasingly discussed how mineral revenue could help finance agriculture, irrigation, food processing, storage facilities, and rural development. The message was simple. A nation cannot eat gold, but gold can help produce food. For many African observers, this represented more than an economic adjustment. It represented a change in mindset. For generations, African resources often left the continent in their raw form, while finished products and even basic food supplies returned at much higher prices. Burkina Faso wanted to ask a different question. What if more of that value stayed at home? Imagine a truck carrying freshly mined gold. For years, many people saw that truck as a symbol of national wealth leaving the country. Now imagine another convoy. This one carries irrigation pipes, farm machinery, seed storage equipment, solar-powered water pumps. Instead of transporting wealth away, it delivers opportunity back to rural communities. That image has become increasingly powerful across Burkina Faso. One miner near Yaoundé described it in remarkably simple words. For years, we watched our gold leave. Now, we hope part of it comes back. Those words spread quickly because they reflected something millions of Africans understood. True wealth is not measured only by what a nation exports. It is also measured by what its people can build. Across villages, agricultural cooperatives began discussing what greater investment could mean. More reliable irrigation, better storage facilities, less food wasted after harvest, modern equipment shared among farming communities, training for young agricultural engineers. None of these projects promise overnight miracles. Agriculture has never worked that way. Every harvest requires patience. Every season carries risk. But investment changes possibilities. Instead of reacting to drought after it arrives, farmers can prepare before it begins. Instead of losing crops after harvest, communities can preserve them longer. Instead of depending entirely on imported food, local production can gradually expand. This shift also carries symbolic importance. For decades, discussions about African development often focused on loans, aid, or emergency assistance. Burkina Faso is trying to redirect part of that conversation toward production, toward investment, toward long-term capacity. Supporters believe this approach strengthens resilience. Critics argue it carries financial risks. The debate continues. But inside many rural communities, people are watching something much more practical than political speeches. They are watching whether fields become greener, whether reservoirs hold more water, whether harvests improve, whether children have enough to eat during the dry season, because those are the measurements that matter most. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, many American farming communities continue facing their own challenges. Trade uncertainty has complicated export markets. Production costs remain high. Farmers continue adapting to changing global conditions, although the circumstances are very different. Both countries are searching for the same answer. How do you protect agriculture in an increasingly unpredictable world? Burkina Faso believes one answer begins by investing more of its own natural wealth into its own soil. Whether that vision succeeds remains to be seen. But one thing is already changing: the conversation. Because once people begin asking where national wealth should go first, the next question becomes impossible to ignore. If gold is no longer expected to rescue debt, where exactly should it go instead? Sometimes history is not written inside financial institutions. Sometimes it begins the moment a single seed touches the soil. And that is exactly where Burkina Faso's next chapter begins. The real turning point did not begin inside a gold mine. It began in a field, Just after sunrise, in a small village outside Bobo Dioulasso, an elderly farmer slowly bent down and picked up a handful of dark soil. He rubbed it between his fingers before smiling quietly. For years, he had watched truck after truck carry Burkina Faso's gold beyond its borders. Yet every planting season, his village still prayed for rain, borrowed old machinery, and hoped that imported food would remain affordable. This year felt different, not because the weather had changed, because the country's priorities had begun to change. Instead of asking how much gold could be sold abroad, officials increasingly asked another question: how could part of that wealth help produce more food at home? That single shift transformed the national conversation. Across Burkina Faso, discussions about mining were no longer ending at export figures. They were beginning with farmers. Across rural communities, agricultural cooperatives started hearing about new investments aimed at strengthening local production. Irrigation canals were expanded in some areas. Water reservoirs received new attention. Seed storage facilities were improved. Agricultural training programs welcomed a new generation of technicians eager to modernize farming while protecting traditional knowledge. None of these projects promised instant prosperity, but together, they pointed towards something much bigger: preparation instead of emergency, investment instead of dependency, production instead of permanent shortage. One young agricultural engineer explained it in a way that resonated across social media. Gold cannot grow, but it can help everything else grow. Those 11 words captured the heart of Burkina Faso's new agricultural philosophy. The idea spread quickly because it was easy to understand. People do not eat mineral reserves. Families eat what farmers harvest. Children do not survive because a country owns gold. They survive because fields produce food. That realization became increasingly powerful inside villages where farming has always been more than a profession. It is identity. It is dignity. It is survival. Near Ouahigouya, members of a farming cooperative gathered beneath a large acacia tree after finishing work in the fields. They spoke about what greater investment could mean over the next decade. One hoped for reliable irrigation. Another dreamed of modern grain storage that would reduce post-harvest losses. A young woman wanted better access to farming equipment so fewer children would have to leave their villages in search of work. Then, an elderly grandmother quietly interrupted the discussion. She looked across the fields before saying something no one forgot. "My grandchildren cannot eat gold. They eat what our land gives them." Silence followed. No economist could have explained the policy more clearly. That sentence traveled from village meetings to local radio stations. Soon it became part of a much larger national conversation. Supporters argued that Burkina Faso was redefining wealth itself. Real wealth was no longer measured only by mineral exports. It was measured by stronger harvests, healthier children, more resilient communities, and greater confidence that the next drought would not automatically become the next food crisis. President Ibrahim Traoré has repeatedly emphasized the importance of economic sovereignty and increasing domestic production. For many supporters, investing resource revenues in productive sectors like agriculture represents part of that broader vision of strengthening national resilience and reducing long-term dependence. Whether every goal can be achieved remains uncertain. Agriculture is shaped by weather, markets, infrastructure, and countless other factors. But one thing had already changed: hope. For decades, many young Africans believed opportunity could only be found somewhere else. Some dreamed of Europe. Others dreamed of America. Many simply dreamed of leaving. Now another possibility was entering the conversation. Perhaps opportunity could be built at home. Agricultural colleges began attracting more students. Young engineers discussed irrigation technology instead of migration. Small entrepreneurs explored food processing businesses that could add value before crops left their communities. The excitement was not driven by speeches alone. It was driven by possibility. Meanwhile, outside Africa, analysts were beginning to notice something unusual. Most countries blessed with natural resources invest heavily in extraction. Burkina Faso appeared increasingly interested in investing in what came after extraction. The gold itself was no longer presented as the final achievement. It was becoming a tool. A means to strengthen another foundation. Agriculture, food security, rural employment, long-term resilience. Across West Africa, people started asking an uncomfortable question. If one country could redirect more of its mineral wealth toward feeding its own people, could others eventually do the same? That question quietly crossed borders. It reached Bamako, Niamey, Accra, Dakar. And with every new discussion, the idea became a little larger than Burkina Faso itself. It began sounding less like an agricultural policy and more like the beginning of a continental conversation. History often changes one decision at a time, one field at a time, one harvest at a time. But what happens when neighboring countries begin asking exactly the same question? That is where this story becomes far bigger than Burkina Faso alone. The moment Burkina Faso began connecting gold revenue to food security instead of treating agriculture as an afterthought, something unexpected happened. People across Africa started paying attention. Not because Burkina Faso had suddenly become the richest nation on the continent, but because it was asking a question that many Africans had carried in silence for generations: why should Africa's natural wealth leave first, while its people wait last? That question spread faster than any government announcement. It traveled through farmers' cooperatives, university classrooms, business forums, community radio stations, village meetings, and conversations around dinner tables. For years, Africa had exported enormous quantities of gold, cocoa, cotton, uranium, coffee, and countless other raw materials. Yet every drought, every global supply disruption, every food price increase reminded millions of families how vulnerable that system could be. Now, another possibility was beginning to emerge. What if natural resources did not simply finance exports? What if they financed food security? In Bamako, a young agricultural economist followed Burkina Faso's reforms closely. He wasn't interested only in gold production. He wanted to understand the bigger picture. If mineral wealth can build irrigation, he said during a regional conference, then perhaps mining is no longer just an extractive industry. Perhaps it becomes the engine that protects future harvests. His words received quiet applause, not because everyone agreed, but because many people had begun asking similar questions. In Niger, several farmers gathered after sunset beside a newly repaired irrigation canal. The conversation quickly turned away from weather forecasts. Instead, they discussed something much larger. If Burkina succeeds, one farmer asked, what stops the rest of us from trying? No one answered immediately. The silence itself carried weight. Across Ghana, agricultural entrepreneurs explored new opportunities to process more food locally before exporting it. In Senegal, discussions continued about strengthening domestic rice production. Throughout the Sahel, governments and researchers increasingly shared ideas about irrigation, storage, seed improvement, and regional trade. Every country faced different realities. Every economy had different strengths. But one idea connected them all. Africa could create more value before its wealth left the continent. That possibility was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. President Ibrahim Traoré's supporters argued that Burkina Faso was demonstrating a different development philosophy. Instead of treating agriculture as a permanent recipient of emergency support, it could become a strategic national investment. Critics remained cautious. They questioned whether resource revenues alone could transform agriculture. They warned about fluctuating commodity prices, climate uncertainty, security challenges, infrastructure gaps. Those concerns were real. No serious observer denied them. But supporters responded with a simple argument. Doing nothing carried risks too. Waiting had costs. Dependency had costs. Food imports had costs, and every year that passed without stronger domestic production created new vulnerabilities. That debate reached ordinary citizens more than experts expected. One university student in Ouagadougou summarized it during a public discussion. "My parents' generation hoped aid would solve our problems. My generation hopes opportunity will." His classmates nodded. Not because they believed the journey would be easy, because they believed it was worth attempting. Another young entrepreneur had recently opened a small business processing locally grown tomatoes. He employed 12 people. It was not a large factory. It would never make international headlines. Yet for 12 families, it represented something extraordinary. Jobs created from crops grown by local farmers. Value added before products left the country. Income remaining inside the community. This is how countries grow, he explained. Not one miracle, 1,000 small victories. That sentence captured another important truth. Burkina Faso's agricultural vision was never only about farms. It was about creating an entire economic chain. Seeds, water, harvests, storage, transportation, processing, markets, employment. Every link strengthened the next. Every investment created another possibility. As those ideas spread across Africa, international observers also noticed the changing conversation. For decades, development discussions often focused on how much assistance African countries needed. Increasingly, another discussion was emerging. How much value could Africa create with the resources it already possessed? That shift may seem subtle, but it changes everything. Because once a nation begins asking how to multiply its own strengths, it slowly stops defining itself by its weaknesses. And nowhere was that contrast becoming more visible than in agriculture. Across the continent, young Africans were beginning to imagine careers that previous generations rarely considered possible. Agricultural engineering, food technology, irrigation design, cold storage logistics, farm equipment manufacturing. Instead of seeing agriculture as a symbol of poverty, many started seeing it as the foundation of modern economic growth. Hope began replacing resignation. Confidence slowly challenged dependency. The story was no longer about one president, or one policy, or even one country. It was becoming a conversation about Africa's future. Yet, while optimism continued to grow across much of the continent, not everyone viewed these developments with the same enthusiasm. Because if Africa became increasingly capable of feeding itself, processing more of its own resources, and expanding trade within the continent, the balance of global economic influence could gradually begin to shift. That possibility was now attracting attention far beyond Africa, and nowhere was that attention more closely watched than in Washington. As Burkina Faso's agricultural strategy gained attention, the conversation gradually expanded beyond the country's borders. The question was no longer simply how much gold Burkina Faso produced. The more important question became how that wealth could be used once it reached the national treasury. Around the world, resource-rich countries have taken different paths. Some have invested heavily in infrastructure. Others have prioritized education, industry, or sovereign wealth funds. Burkina Faso's growing emphasis on agriculture added another perspective to that global discussion. Supporters argued that no country can build lasting prosperity without a secure food system. Roads matter. Power plants matter. Factories matter. But every one of them ultimately depends on people who are healthy, productive, and well-fed. That is why many development economists often describe agriculture as the first link in a much longer economic chain. When farms become more productive, local businesses grow. When food becomes more reliable, families spend less on basic necessities. When rural incomes improve, small industries begin to emerge. One investment creates another. One harvest supports another opportunity. Near Koudougou, a young entrepreneur recently expanded a small grain processing workshop. Just a few years earlier, he had been considering moving overseas in search of work. Instead, he chose to stay. "We always talked about exporting our future," he said. "Maybe now we can build it here." His workshop employed only 15 people. Yet, for those 15 families, the change was significant. Farmers sold more locally. Transport companies carried more products. Markets became more active. Value remained inside the community instead of leaving immediately after harvest. Across Burkina Faso, similar stories began appearing. None of them looked dramatic on television. There were no grand ceremonies, no spectacular announcements, only irrigation channels reaching another village, another storage warehouse opening, another cooperative purchasing shared equipment, another harvest arriving with a little less uncertainty than the year before. History rarely changes in one extraordinary moment. More often, it changes through thousands of ordinary decisions repeated every single day. But while optimism continued to grow inside many farming communities, another question naturally followed. Could one country's experience inspire broader conversations across Africa? That possibility was beginning to attract attention. Across Africa, governments face very different realities. Some countries are rich in minerals. Others depend heavily on agriculture. Many combine both. There is no single development model that fits every nation. Yet, Burkina Faso's experience has encouraged a broader discussion about one shared principle. How can natural resources create more value before they leave the country? In regional forums, researchers increasingly discussed food processing, irrigation, renewable energy for farming, modern storage systems, and stronger trade links between neighboring countries. Young entrepreneurs were asking new questions. Could African-made equipment become more competitive? Could local food industries reduce post-harvest losses? Could regional markets absorb more products grown within Africa? None of these questions have simple answers, but asking them represents progress. For decades, many conversations centered on what Africa lacked. Now, more discussions are focusing on what Africa can build. A professor speaking to agricultural students summarized the moment with remarkable clarity. Natural resources may open the first door, but knowledge determines how many doors remain open. Those words resonated with the next generation. Across classrooms, laboratories, and vocational training centers, more young Africans began seeing agriculture not as the work of yesterday, but as an industry of tomorrow. Precision irrigation, seed research, food logistics, cold chain technology, agricultural engineering, digital marketplaces connecting farmers directly with consumers. The future being imagined was no longer limited to growing crops. It included building complete agricultural value chains capable of supporting stronger local economies. That vision requires investment, patience, sound institutions, and cooperation across many sectors. No single leader can achieve it alone. No single policy can guarantee it. But every long journey begins with a decision to move forward. And perhaps that is why Burkina Faso's story continues to spark interest far beyond its borders. Because it raises a timeless question. What happens when a nation begins measuring success not only by what it extracts from the ground, but by what it helps grow above it? Perhaps the greatest change taking place in Burkina Faso is not economic. It is psychological. For generations, many Africans were told that development would always arrive from somewhere else. Investment would come from somewhere else. Technology would come from somewhere else. Solutions would come from somewhere else. Today, a different conversation is quietly emerging. What if more solutions can also be built at home? That idea does not reject international cooperation. On the contrary, successful economies have always learned from one another. Shared technology, shared knowledge, shared investment. But cooperation is strongest when every partner brings something meaningful to the table. Many supporters believe that increasing agricultural capacity strengthens that position. A nation able to feed more of its own people enters every negotiation with greater confidence. Food security supports economic security. Economic security supports political stability. and political stability creates more opportunities for future investment. The chain begins with something surprisingly simple: healthy soil, reliable water, skilled farmers, innovative young engineers, communities willing to invest in tomorrow instead of waiting for tomorrow to arrive. One elderly farmer expressed that idea better than any policy paper ever could. "When we plant a tree," he said, "we are not proving what we have. We are protecting what our grandchildren may become." Perhaps that is the real lesson of this story. Gold remains valuable. Minerals remain important. Exports will continue to matter. But the greatest wealth of any nation has always been its people. When those people are healthy, educated, productive, and confident about their future, every other investment becomes stronger. Perhaps that is why this conversation extends far beyond Burkina Faso. It is ultimately about priorities, about resilience, about choosing investments that create opportunities lasting far beyond a single generation. As the sun sets across the fields of Burkina Faso, the sound that defines the future is not the noise of a distant mine. It is the steady rhythm of farmers preparing another season. Children walking home from school, water flowing through irrigation channels, small businesses opening their doors, communities planning for tomorrow instead of merely surviving today. No one can predict exactly where this journey will lead. Every development strategy faces challenges. Every nation must adapt to changing economic realities. But one truth remains remarkably consistent throughout history. Countries become stronger when they transform natural wealth into human opportunity. Perhaps that is the most important question Burkina Faso invites the world to consider. Not how much gold lies beneath the ground, but how much hope can grow above it. If this story gave you a new perspective, we would love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe investing natural resource wealth in agriculture and food security can create stronger long-term development? Share your perspective in the comments below. If you enjoyed this analysis, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we continue exploring the ideas, innovations, and decisions shaping Africa's future. Thank you for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of one another, and never stop asking the questions that help us better understand our changing world.